It had been a foggy morning. Katie discovered that fog meant the air was colder than the water. Orbie found out that when you listen carefully, you can hear the water talk. And they both learned that sometimes fish jump right out of the water to catch their breakfast. By the middle of the morning, the fog had disappeared and a strong, warm sun was beaming. Katie and Orbie were busy sweeping off the veranda. Mom and Dad were fixing a hole in the screen. Dad decided that everybody should take a break. Katie and Mom felt like swimming, but Orbie wasn't too sure that he wanted to. Dad wondered if he wanted to go for a ride in the paddle boat. Orbie tooted and spun in the broom, a ride in the paddle boat. That was the most perfect thing to do on a day like today. In the boathouse, Orbie put on his life jacket. Nobody went in a boat without one. Orbie asked Dad why he wore one. He knew how to swim. Dad explained that if anything ever happened that made it hard for him to swim, the life jacket would hold him up the same way Orbie's did. It was good to know that he was just like Dad. Dad paddled the boat out of the boathouse. Orbie stretched way down to reach the pedals, but his toes just couldn't make it. Once they were out in the lake, Dad asked if Orbie wanted to go and take a quiet peek at nature. Now, Orbie had always loved nature, and he was excited about peeking at it. Dad pedaled to the shore. He didn't dock the boat, but moved it slowly along the shoreline. Dad asked Orbie to tell him what things in nature he saw. At first, Orbie said none, but then Dad asked him to look more carefully. Orbie saw all kinds of things in the water. Under a lily pad, there were 3 fish enjoying the shade. The lily pad itself had a beautiful white flower on it. Dad told Orbie that it was called a water lily because it liked to grow right through the water to the surface. Its roots were way down in the bottom of the lake. Orbie could see the long stem of the water lily going down in the water. As they moved along, Dad told Orbie that someone was looking at him, and he wondered if Orbie could figure out who. Well, Orbie looked up the shore to see if it was Katie or Mom. Then he looked toward old Mr. Cobb's house, but no one was there. Dad told him that the someone he was thinking of was almost close enough for him to touch. Orbie looked back at the lily pads, and as he did, he saw 2 shiny green bumps. When he looked closer, he saw that it was a frog almost hanging in the water. Orbie reached over to touch him, but in a splash, he was gone. Soon Dad asked Orbie to be very quiet. Shh. He pointed off to the shore where there was some tall grass. Dad whispered that the grass that grew out of the water is called reeds. Then he asked Orbie to look carefully into the reeds and see if he could see something hiding in there. It only took Orbie a moment, and then he noticed that it was a strange-looking gray-blue bird. Dad told him it was a great blue heron. It wasn't the first time Orbie had seen the heron, but it was the first time he'd seen it so close. The heron looked at Orbie. He didn't want him to come any closer to his home. He lived in the reeds, and that was a good idea because the reeds were a good hiding place. Orbie wondered if the great blue heron liked to eat the reeds. And Dad told him no, it liked to eat fish. Dad also told Orbie that the heron was related to some of the birds that were alive when dinosaurs traveled the earth. Orbie loved the fact that his lake had its own special bird. Soon Dad and Orbie came to a small pile of logs. One of the logs was moving and seemed to be sinking. Dad told Orbie that someone was at work. Just then a beaver popped out of the water and climbed up in the pile of logs. He gave them a good whack with his tail. Beavers are very busy, Dad said. They like to chop down trees and build dams. Sometimes that was a problem. There were special people who were called wildlife protectors who caught the beavers and took them to places where it was okay to chop down trees and build dams. Then everybody was happy. Orbie wondered if someone would take their beaver away. Dad told Orbie that the lake was big enough for everybody. Orbie was glad of that. As they were turning around and heading back home, there was a beautiful sound that came from further out on the lake. When Dad turned the boat around, he saw a bird that looked just like the ducks at the duck pond. Dad told Orbie that, in fact, it was a loon. Loons have a very pretty call, and people like to hear it. He also told Orbie he could tell the difference between a duck and a loon because the loon always wears a necklace. When they got closer, Orbie could see the white ring around the loon's neck. Orbie looked at Dad. He knew almost everything. Orbie wanted to be just like him when he grew up. He really wanted to pedal the boat just like Dad, too. Dad told him he might have to grow a few inches before he could do that, but he certainly could steer the boat. Orbie loved the idea, and after a short driving lesson, they headed for the boathouse. That's when they started to run into trouble. Fun trouble. Every time Dad wanted to go one way, Orbie would steer it beautifully, but the boat would swing too far. Then Dad would correct it, and they would try again, and the boat would swing too far the other way. Dad chuckled as they zigzagged into the boathouse. Driving a boat took lots of practice. As Dad helped him take off his life jacket, Orbie snorkeled that he wasn't very good at driving the paddle boat. Dad told him that one day he'd get it right. When Orbie told Mom and Katie about the things he'd seen, they were very impressed. And I guess you know that it wasn't the last paddle boat trip the family took. Every time they went out, they found another piece of nature waiting to be explored. And one day, if you have a chance, you will love exploring nature too. And I happen to know that nature will be very glad you stopped by, because you and nature just naturally go together.
Did you know? No. Did you know? Did you know? Did you know? Lots of foods from nature come in their own packages. Nuts come in shells. Peas come in pods. Some foods are wrapped in a rind, such as watermelon, cantaloupes, and honeydew melons. And if you think about it, oranges are too.